Join Politically Conscious Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time live on YouTube as we separate fact from fiction. Project 2025 was dismissed as a hoax. Now critics say Trump's second term is targeting DEI, Black history, and voting rights with remarkable speed and precision. Is this a coordinated assault on Black America or political hysteria? If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. What's up, everybody? This is episode 76 of Politically Conscious. Glad to be Black with you once again, as we like to say, from the Mental Dialogue Community Club. For those who know, I do that as well. But we are finally getting to this thing we call politics. We've discussed race, sex, and culture for a number of years. And for the past little over a year's time, I've been bringing on my brother, Emil Bryant. We just lost our other side of this thing, Shelly Winters, for those who were looking forward to seeing him today. He's in a meeting, and so we'll go ahead and let the cat out the bag. We are one-winged, as I like to say, anytime we do the show without both sides. I try to moderate these political conversations from the middle, and I have Emil represent the left, who's a political historian. I'll let him tell a little more about himself. And we usually have Brother Leo Smith or Shelly Winters representing the right, typically from week to week as we pop up on you. So again, we are doing this one-winged, and we will do this conversation the best we can and try to dig in it from the other perspective as best we can, which obviously we're limited because our perspectives are our own. But with that said, Emil, tell them who you are, and I had a funny cut that I was gonna play right after the intro for Shelly. I would still play it just for the sake of it, but I was really setting it up thinking, Shelly was gonna be able to be here, but he's not able to be here. But anyway, tell them who you are. I'm gonna play a quick cut. We'll laugh about it, and then we'll get into the show.
For sure. Emil Bryant. I am an author, political consultant, and strategist. My job is to advise my candidates when they work with me to tell the truth, tell it early, tell it often. Bad news does not get better with time. And when you're unpacking propaganda, it only helps the voter who needs more information, more accurate information, so they can make an intelligent decision about who represents them. And remember, every time you vote, you're voting for a representative. So make sure you know what they're saying, because they should be saying it for you.
Good stuff. So this will be my last time highlighting the fact that we're missing Shelly, but this was a tribute to him because I know he's a fan of this guy right here. And so basically I am doing something I rarely ever do. I'm trolling on social media with this cut right here.
Okay, everybody, a lot of people are going to be saying happy Juneteenth. It should not be a federal holiday, and I'm on my way to work. Have a good day.
All right, so here's how you know how the hate on Juneteenth is purely about anti-blackness. What holidays in American society do you know that people loathe to take? The 4th of July is not really about the American Independence Day anymore. It's about going and buying a bunch of fireworks and then exploding them at nighttime. I don't know of a single American who hasn't done military service take Veterans Day and go, you know what? I'm going to go down to the Veterans Cemetery. I'm going to pay tribute and homage to all of the people who sacrificed their lives so that I could enjoy the freedom and the benefits. Most Americans will sit in the bed, turn on Netflix, and just enjoy it. Never once even so much as thinking about anyone who died in the line of duty. If we can acknowledge that there are plenty of Americans who can go numerous other federal holidays without even so much as thinking about what that federal holiday is supposed to be about, why is it now that all of a sudden you got some people who are like, God damn it, you know what? I'm tired of all these vacation days. I'm tired of sleeping in. I'm tired of turning on and binging my favorite show. You know what I really want to do today? I want to go and sit in front of a computer and work. Most people aren't doing that. So now all of a sudden that we get another free day to take off of work, but it has to do with Black people being freed from enslavement. All of a sudden, oh God, Juneteenth. Oh no, it shouldn't be a holiday. I've never heard of it before. Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? You get a free day off. What are you complaining about? So really, the only thing you're complaining about is the idea that Juneteenth is just a day to acknowledge the Black people you don't like. Anti-Juneteenth sentiments is just yet another form of normalized white supremacy. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
So would have loved, Shelly Winters is the way I think of him. He's a fan of Charlie Kirk. God is no longer here. But hey, if he was here, Emil, he would have worked last Friday. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
So,
You know,
he's gonna work.
He's an entertainer. He is a pundit. He is a talking head on media. So the show got to go on, right? We can't let as they say, one monkey don't stop no show. And the funny part is that we can acknowledge the history of the day without complaining about the history of the day. So I just laugh when people have this very unique perspective that all of a sudden out of nowhere we're celebrating a day. But I was old enough to remember when Martin Luther King holiday came along. And I remember the pushback on that. So I'm very comfortable that this is not anything new. 40 years ago, 45 years ago, when Dr. King's holiday came up and they were putting it in January, everybody was like, oh, it's this, it's that. And it was just another day off. And now it's we call it a day of service and all that sort of stuff. But it took a lot of normalization before people got comfortable that the day was the day.
And I'm just saying, Charlie Kirk himself, he would have worked last Friday. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right, let's get into this discussion today. Trump's assault on Black America, real or fabricated, was the question today. And so here's a cut from this sister. She was basically highlighting Rachel Maddow. And so I wanted to play parts of her cut and get, ideally, both of your responses to what she's having to say. And so we'll just do this as best we can. But this is Rachel Maddow pointing out from her perspective Trump's, I would say, war, based on what she said, on Black America. But let me get your thoughts on this cut here, Emil.
The other side of it.
But on the issue of race, on the treatment of African Americans specifically, even being terrible at what they're doing has still proven to be disastrous for our country. And it is, in part, the posturing from the White House and the president. That is stuff that validates and excites the worst bigots in the country, and that is consequential. But it's more than that, too. We are now about 16 months into what has been from day one a concerted and intense targeting of Black Americans, specifically by this president and by this administration. On his first full day in office, he proclaims war on diversity efforts, not only in government, but in any institution in the country over which he can exert leverage, everything from schools and universities to law firms to private businesses of every stripe. He then immediately started firing some of the highest profile Black public officials in the whole U.S. government, seemingly regardless of any other thing about them. I mean, right away, we get the firing of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Charles C.Q. Brown. We get the firing of the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden. And then it's Gwynne Wilcox from the National Labor Relations Board. And then it's Robert Primus, the chair of the Surface Transportation Board. And then it's Alvin Brown from the NTSB. And then it's Peggy Carr, the head of the National Center for Education Statistics. And then it's Willie Phillips from FERC, from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then it's Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and on and on and on. When Trump and his top political donor, Elon Musk, then started just lopping off huge swaths of the federal government to disastrous practical effect, the largest and most egregious cuts targeted federal agencies that employed a disproportionate number of Black employees. Reporter Erica Green wrote about this a few months ago for The Times, noting that nothing had moved backwards in the federal government for Black Americans this quickly or this far in over 100 years. Since Woodrow Wilson came in 1912 and resegregated the federal workforce. Quote, Black employees were fired or demoted to lower-level jobs, relegated to separate and inferior lunchrooms and other facilities, and accused of making white women feel unsafe. Those who remained were humiliated. A Black worker in the Postal Service was surrounded by screens, so white workers would not have to look at him. Another employee had a cage built around him to separate him from his white counterparts. A clerk in the Treasury Secretary's office was assigned to rewrite all correspondence to address Black employees by their first names, the way Trump addressed the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, by her first name when he crowed publicly about firing her for no reason. In the year of our Lord, 2025.
So that's the opening. I got more from her. So she's going to lead half of this show, if you will. because it's a long cut, and obviously we're gonna make people watch it all at one take, if you will. So we'll jump in right there, Emil. Now again, this is Rachel Maddow. I think I'm understand it correctly. Her thoughts about what she's saying, and the context right before that, from what I understand, is basically she's highlighting specifically she sees what's happening with the administration specifically as a racial thing more so than a class thing. So let me throw that idea out there for you as well. That's some of the context that I didn't play of what the sister who set it up said. Go ahead, brother. Your thoughts on what she had to say.
So to Dr. Maddow's point, she's seeing something or is learning of something that has been very present, but hasn't been so overt over the last, 40 years. President Reagan did some similar stuff. So did President George H.W. Bush. So did President George W. Bush. But they're different. The differences in the way they did it and the ways that they didn't attack the structures as vigorously. They didn't attack it overtly. They always tried to undermine it very subtly. This is a very specific and overt attack. And when Dr. Maddow named all those people, she wasn't just naming them because they were in the other party. This is not just the Republicans favor their party, their players over the Democrats. We've seen this before where it's actually, very normal. There are over 3,000 political appointees in the administration. When one administration comes, the other goes. They replace almost all of those people. There's a mad scramble for the political appointees to become career civil servants. But that process is a little bit different than what you saw here. The case in point would be General Brown. Usually, just to maintain continuity, just to maintain order, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who serves at the pleasure of the president, absolutely true, doesn't normally get replaced until their term is up. And then the president selects the person they want to put in place. Same with all of the chiefs of staff of each of the services. They don't normally fire them and replace them. It's more than just a Republican versus Democrat, new administration type stuff, because it seemed to be very targeted. And I don't have the statistic in front of me, but looking at the optics, it certainly did not look like it was specific to Republican versus Democrat. Now, you can say the president wants everybody on his team, and there was a very specific effort to try to make everybody, inspectors general, chiefs of staff, in every department, loyalists. So that was part of it. But it also meant that taking people out of positions that don't normally have a political lean now became very political. And the way that political lean showed up was Black people getting fired.
And if we recall, we talked about General Brown being fired on the show, Emil, if you recall that. And what we highlighted specifically at the time was how the replacement seemed to have no merit compared to General Brown. I forget who replaced him now, but it was like, okay, this is quote unquote the merit. I just remember we talked about it saying, hey, this is the merit-based administration, but look who is replacing this guy with all of this merit. And I even seen a video recently that broke down specifically how that position is selected and how it's the antithesis of anything but merit. I mean, I'm sorry, I hope I'm saying it correctly. Saying how to get, for example, just the Air Force Secretary of Staff, and then to actually get the actual position, like the position itself, like what they actually go through and what's being monitored to actually get the position. It's the antithesis of having, I'm not saying you have to have such an amazing merit-based record to even be considered for the position. And so to get rid of General Brown under the guise of, we're going to be a merit base and DEI and all this kind of stuff, it actually railed in the face of it based on somebody even getting selected for the position. And like you said, historically, ending the term has always been normal. So
absolutely. And General Kane, who's, a fine general in most respects, he was at the CIA, he was the associate director for military affairs at the CIA before he retired in December of 2024. So he was a 3-star general who the president pulled out of retirement to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I honestly don't think it necessarily worked in his favor, because General Kane, though he is politically very aligned with the president, as a military leader has been very prudent, has tried very hard to offer wise counsel to the president as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff should. And I know necessarily that it is as much fealty as he thought he was going to get from someone who was politically aligned with him. However, to your point about his qualifications, no, he was not qualified, in the sense that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is typically someone who is a chief of staff of their service first, and then they pull them into the chairman position, basically because they have such a rapport with not only the other chiefs of staff and the four-star generals, but also international players. Remember, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the president's military advisor, but he's also the president's military representative abroad. So there's lots of international opportunities that are being mentioned. I don't know if General Kane had those kinds of credentials, as well as what was missing from his service in the United States Air Force.
Nah, thank you for that perspective. And yeah, I'm definitely, I couldn't remember his name. I'm not necessarily downplaying General Kane, but I know just in comparison and knowing the actual process, to your point, is nobody's getting selected in a position who doesn't deserve it, period, point blank. And just the optics of coming in on, we're going to be the merit base. And you just, if you even cared about it, you know, it's no way you would fire General Brown. But I think McDowell may be on something.
Nor would you hire for your Secretary of Defense a failed major, Army major from the reserves, who, you know, they're talking about, you know, some of the tattoos he's wearing and some of the ways he's seeing the world and some of the controversy he had in the past. And there were, and this is what, you know, sort of confounds me, there were plenty of very loyal people to the president who had those credentials that would have made a great Secretary of Defense, but he chose someone very specifically. So you have to wonder what was behind the scenes, because what we're not seeing, and this is where Black people in America are really getting frustrated with this administration specifically, but not exclusively. It's like, wait a second. You swear up and down it's merit-based. You sprinkle the words merit-based, but then when we look, you're firing people who are highly qualified and you're hiring people who are underqualified. And that, to Dr. Maddow's point, that is part of the problem. We're not seeing a replacement of highly competent with highly competent. We're seeing a replacement of highly competent with people who don't seem to have the credentials that were just not enough. So if this person's not enough, what is enough? Loyalty? Loyalty ain't merit.
No, absolutely. And I've always highlighted, as someone who's worked specifically in college recruiting and understanding exactly how this process worked, anytime you see affirmative action or DEI go away, you see mediocre white people get positions. I've always said that, and I stand by it to this day. But anyway, let's play another cut from Rachel Maddow.
And now 2026, this president and this administration is not just inheriting that history from the Wilson administration, it's furthering it in its own ways. Since 1965, there has been an executive order in effect. It was signed by Lyndon Johnson, 1965. Since 1965, all federal contractors have been banned by executive order from discriminating on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Donald Trump rescinded that 1965 rule on his first full day in office. Less than a month later, Trump announced another rule change. They rescinded Clause 52.222-21 of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which doesn't sound like much, but I'll tell you what the title of that is. It's Prohibition of Segregated Facilities. That's what Trump rescinded less than 1 month into being back in the White House. That section reads, quote, the contractor agrees that it does not and will not maintain or provide for its employees any segregated facilities at any of its establishments, and that it does not and will not permit its employees to perform their services at any location under its control where segregated facilities are maintained. That anti-segregation clause has been in government contracts for decades. Donald Trump overtly reached out to rescind it, which means bluntly that the federal government no longer explicitly prohibits contractors from having segregated restaurants, waiting rooms, and drinking fountains. Make America great again, right? Recently fired and sidelined employees in the Department of Housing and Urban Development have started sounding the alarm that the Trump administration is no longer, just bluntly no longer enforcing a federal law known as the Fair Housing Act. Fair Housing Act, another pillar of the civil rights movements and its achievements. The Fair Housing Act dates to 1968. It says you can't refuse to rent to someone or refuse to sell a house to someone on account of their race, or their color, or religion, or national origin, or any other factor against which we're supposed to be protected from discrimination. According to current and former employees of the Department of Housing and Urban Development under Donald Trump, they have dropped enforcement of the Federal Housing Act. In Trump's first year back in office, black unemployment spiked in this country from 6.2% all the way up to 7.5%, making it the highest of all racial groups. Under Joe Biden, black unemployment had been at a record low of 4.8%, spiking now under Donald Trump.
Few things stood out to me, Emil, and then I'll let you go.
Yes, sir.
She says Trump overtly goes after the no segregation clause, right? Overtly goes after, as a legal studies major, I quite understand there are so many laws on the books around the countries, in municipalities, states, and federal, that are on the books that no longer apply. And as we learn in the legal studies major, that a law that is not applied is no longer a law. And so a lot of states will typically not waste time even trying to go through the official legal process or political process to take a law off books if we just no longer enforce it. So while I look at when Rachel Maddow was pointing that out, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a silly thing because we're not going to see segregation return. Like, that's not what's going there. But when she says it clearly, he overtly goes after it. I wanted to point out what's being done there, right? To actually take the time to take that. You know, we're not going to see segregation come back. Like, that's not reality. But I agree with her that this administration overtly goes after it. When you know, a thing is a thing, it has to be acknowledged. And so going after it overtly is not typically what's done with laws that no longer apply. So I definitely wanted to say that. The other thing that stood out to me is you've heard me say this plenty of times, that when we look at the civil rights activity, the civil rights movement, we have incorrectly learned history in understanding what the goal of the civil rights movement was. As I'm talking about, just as Americans, we've misunderstood it. I've always leaned into that the main goal, and this is why I'm gonna go a little step further today and say why these were the last acts that were done. The main goal was equal protection of the law.
Yes.
That was the main goal. The other thing that happened in 68 was the Fair Housing Act. Those were the two last acts of that movement. They were the ultimate goals because of what African Americans were experiencing around the country. Like, a lot of people don't know that the preface for the affirmative action was what King and them did when he went and stayed in Chicago and saw the difference in the housing. Like, but people don't know about that period. That was the precipice of getting affirmative action started. Most people don't know that. So the Fair Housing Act, because still on the books right now, there are homes you can buy right now that have only sell to white only. Like, that is still a real thing in 2026. They're seeing it in the actual deeds. When they go sell an old house, they see that stuff still written. Like, there are literally legal cases making sure that stuff doesn't still happen. That literally is, and when that's on the deed, it's not a law that could do anything about it. Like, that is still a real thing in 2026. So I want people to understand that making fair, like, that's not something that can be brought forward if they to an executive order to rescind the Fair Housing Act. I want people to not assume that has no effect in 2026 when these things are still on the books today. So that's all I'm offering to add to what she said. Go ahead, brother. Any thoughts?
This is a very frustrating thing, because for the last 60 years since the Fair Housing Act I call it the last of the three, right? You had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and then the Fair Housing Act. And those three acts, that trifecta, is what brought legal equality under the law. That's what brought equality under the law for Black people in America and for all people in America. There are so many others who benefited from the work that Black leaders did in that era to try to just the playing field needs to be equal, right? So in response to that, in the earliest 20th century and definitely since, there were things called racially restrictive covenants. You find them in condo associations and homeowner associations. They're now called covenants. But in those covenants, to your point about what you see, there was a time when they put in those covenants, you cannot be an owner if you are Asian, Black, Latino. Like, they were very, very crystal clear. They were called racially restrictive covenants for a reason, because that's what they wanted. So those covenants, which are supposed to be private documents between homeowners, within a homeowners association, they didn't get updated just because the law changed. Now, what you're seeing in the rescinding of Executive Order 11246, so I want people to go look at Executive Order 11246, because the text of that is very specific, and what was rescinded wasn't just what was for workers who were under contract. Contract workers who are to the federal government. It also took away the enforcement mechanisms.
Yes.
This is the part that I think it muddies the waters. The enforcement mechanism is how you prevent de facto segregation.
Absolutely.
The de facto segregation is, although the law says, here's what practice looks like. And then when you say, hey, your practice is discriminatory, it's against the law, you would go to the Office of Civil Rights and you would say, file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or one of the other mechanisms that are in the federal government, which are now being either stripped away or severely undermanned. You would then say, enforce the law. Again, integration was not necessarily the goal. That was never the end goal. The end goal was equality under the law. If I want to live in a location, that's where I want to live. It doesn't matter if I'm integrating that neighborhood or not. It's just where I want to live. I should be able to buy where I want to live. It doesn't matter. However, when you have no enforcement mechanism and people violate the law, then it becomes very hard to be treated equally when there's no enforcement mechanism when the law is violated.
And let me say this real quick, just for real clear nuance about not even just simply equally. Because I'm always challenging people who fail to understand exactly that the goal was equal protection. The goal was the Fair Housing Act. Like I want to explain that goal like this, because what happens is it ain't just simply that you want it to be treated equally without, to your point, without the punishment aspect. You could build up your own and someone could destroy it. And how amped are people to come destroy your thing if there is a punishment mechanism? So it wasn't simply to be treated equal, but without that, with the de facto second-class citizenship, someone could destroy your stuff without recompense. So by having the law, the equal protection of the law, then there was a price could be paid. And now that the price could be paid, you didn't see people destroying things that you had built up as a Black person on your own, destroying it overtly, because now there was a consequence. And that's why we have laws in this country.
There was a problem during redlining that persists to this day, and that is, how do you get insurance? So if someone burned down your house due to that kind of malice, you couldn't get insurance to rebuild. You were literally driven out of your neighborhood. You were literally driven out of the space because you were in a place that was either low risk, or they underinsured you, or they didn't insure you at all. And there was no consequence to them not insuring you. There was no legal ramification for them saying, we're not going to. And then if you remember, you and Leo had a great conversation a couple of weeks back where he talked about how Lee Atwater had mentioned you can't use the N-bomb anymore, but you can use these other terms. Well, how does that translate in 2026? We do the same thing. We just take away all the ways that we were ordinarily using to prevent this kind of de facto segregation. You don't have to say the N bomb. It doesn't have to be a white hood and a burning cross anymore. You can literally just remove those legal mechanisms, and all of a sudden, the racism tends to creep back into these different spaces. And people say, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. I'm not racist. Meanwhile, take a look at employment statistics, housing statistics, contracting with the government statistics, education statistics. All of a sudden, things change when nobody is overtly racist, because the mechanisms were very important to this process of not just desegregating, but ensuring that there was both equality under the law and a consequence for violating the law when there wasn't equality.
The example I always give is my uncle, who literally lives on the street that's named after him. And it was because he was the first house on the street, so he got to name the street, right? So sounds amazing. He was an engineer way earlier than most people, so he's lived a great life, retired, beautiful home. And he always says, bought this home, I think in the 80s, if I remember correctly. But he always highlights, as well as he's done, the house that he easily could afford when he got that engineering job that he actually wanted, how much it would be worth if he could have lived on the block and bought that home. He could not buy that home, so he bought and had a home built. And like I said, lived the American dream. And it's, but he always highlight how much his net worth would be if he was living on what that same block is worth right now, back in South Carolina, where I'm from, how much he would be worth had he not been denied, but where we're from in the 80s.
Now we're talking about the downstream multi-generational effects of these laws and the consequences of these laws. So imagine there were things called contracts. Let me see if I can remember the name. It was either land contract or rent contract. I can't remember, but basically, especially in big cities, New York, Chicago, LA, a landowner, a homeowner could sell to a Black family, and the contract was between just the two of them, no banks, because remember, no banks could lend money to houses in those redlined areas. So they were so strict. If you missed one payment, if you were one day late, they could take your home. So imagine, on top of not being able to buy a home in a place where your property value could accrue faster, you were under a threat. Now you are in a situation where if your job's threatened, there was no legal recompense. These were awful contracts, but they were the only way some Black people in America could buy their homes. So you had this multitude of ways to push the problem over and over again and shape how Black people responded. If you couldn't do it legally, then you tried to subvert the law. If you subverted the law and there was a legal mechanism, perhaps you would be deterred not to, or you would feel that pain. But when those legal mechanisms were pulled away, what's left? It is, you just have to take it. So we see the disparity in net worth between not average net worth, where you include someone like Elon Musk, but median net worth, where 50% above and 50% below. And now you know that the median net worth between Black and white is vastly different, not just because of enslavement, not just because of bondage, but because of these principles and practices that have been up and down for the last 100 years, where in some parts of the country, you were free to buy wherever you wanted to. In other parts of the country, under Jim Crow, you could not. And then you had across the country redlining, which was not a North or a South issue. It wasn't an East or a West issue. It was everywhere. I'm from Portland, Oregon. It was in Portland. It was in Seattle. It was in LA. It was in Denver. It was also in Dallas. It was also in Des Moines. It was also in Omaha, as well as the places you would traditionally associate with that stuff, like Mobile, Montgomery, and Charleston. We're not talking about a small microcosm of a situation. It is a across the board problem for all Black people in America. It's just some people felt the effect either more recently or more virulently than others did, depending on where they lived in the country.
And we got Kenny saying, 77, saying, my house has whites only covenant on his deed, which is kind of what I was referring to. His house was built in 1949. And now if somehow there was some action, there's no recompense based on the removal of this FHA thing by the president. So again, how do we as African Americans not see that as an attack? Because there is no, once you take away the consequence, we just talked about how it worked in the past when there was no consequence. And we don't have a post-racial society clearly after Obama to where I'm like, oh yeah, just take that away now. Just and why? And having it doesn't affect no one else. So why take it away? Like, let's go through that logic. Like, having it in place, who did it harm?
It only harmed the people who thought they were being harmed by equality. If you've been on top, if you have a structure,
See, I don't even want to give them that right now, Emil. I'm just talking about keeping.
I'm just saying that's
where we stand. But let's not
a grievance, but it's not a truth.
So let's not even take fake harm and use the word harm.
I agree. I'm saying you have a grievance, but I don't think you have evidence of it.
Yeah, none whatsoever. All right, here we go. I'm just, again, I wish we had the other side. Just help me see, is this not a duck? Call a duck, call a duck at what it is. But here's the last one.
African Americans have been targeted by this administration in a concerted way that has nevertheless been devastating, even though the Trump administration isn't good at anything they set their mind to. And that was all before the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court, including all of Trump's appointees, voted to effectively end the Voting Rights Act a few days ago. As soon as the court said they would take up that case, people started mapping the worst-case scenario for what Trump and the Republicans would do, particularly in the South, if the court gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement. And the before and after looks like the snapback after the end of Reconstruction, after the Civil War. I mean, look at the state of Louisiana there. A third of the population of Louisiana is black. Louisiana's Republican governor canceled congressional elections that are already underway in that state to rush through new maps that will presumably make sure that even though 1/3 of the population of that state is black, there will be no black representation in Congress for Louisiana at all. South Carolina, 1/4 of the population is black. They have one majority-minority district represented by an African-American Democrat, Jim Clyburn. They are going to try to get rid of that one black district so that South Carolina is all white, all Republican in representation, while 1/4 of the people who live in that state are black. In Tennessee, 1 in 6 residents is black. Republicans now want to make sure all 9 congressional seats in Tennessee are white. All 9 of them. They want it to be 9-0, white and Republican, when 1 in 6 people in that state is black. In her dissent from the majority ruling, Justice Elena Kagan said it will likely cause the largest reduction to minority representation since the end of Reconstruction. She probably didn't need to use the word likely there. The war on black Americans that is being waged by this president and this Republican Party is one of the only things they have put their mind to in this past year that they've actually done pretty well at. A comprehensive attack on black public officials and black public power. A comprehensive attack on black public officials in the federal government, black employees in the federal government, black representatives in Congress, and now all around the country, where everywhere Republicans are in charge, they are scrambling to make sure that black public officials can no longer hold office. We are in the middle of something really radical in this country, not just to get rid of our constitutional republic, to replace our form of government with something else, but to get rid of the multiracial democracy that our Constitution is supposed to protect. It is a war on black America. The fight to save it is looking like it's going to be the fight of all of our lives.
What did she get right? What did she get wrong from your perspective, Emil?
Dr. Maddow's really hitting some really important points. One of the things that I think, as I was kind of listening to her, I had to look up something. We have talked about how black people in America vote primarily Democratic, 80%, 85%, 90%. In the last election for president, 92% of black women voted for Kamala Harris, and about 78 to 80% of black men voted for her. So we run this weird number, but as registered Republicans, it's not even a funny. It's about a 85-15 or 90-10, depending on the state and the region. But here's what's very interesting. When you see these maps changing, you would say, okay, Black people in America make up about 13% of the American population. So you would like to see roughly about that representation in Congress. It could be a little bit more or less. There's going to be some ideological issues along the way. There's not one Black Republican in the House right now. Not one.
What?
Not
The
one.
House is like 400 and something representatives.
435 representatives, not one Black Republican. There were 4 at one time, and they all went away to do other things. There's one Black Republican in the Senate, Tim Scott.
Tim Scott.
So out of 535 elected members of Congress, you have one Black Republican. And they're going to tell you that this is not about race. I'm not telling you you should listen to them or not listen to them. I'm simply saying, what does the data say? What does the data say? The data tells you that the Republicans are not necessarily looking for Black candidates to represent majority Black districts, even when they were under the Voting Rights Act, where they said, okay, we'll compete a Black Republican and see if we can get one to win there. So where is the fairness? Where's the equality? This is what I think Dr. Maddow is really pointing to when she said, look at these maps. It's not just the maps. It's the fact that you're not seeing one party even try to find the talent that could represent those districts without changing the maps.
In places where we still mostly live. Like
Correct.
The Great Migration happened out of the South, but we're literally still in the same places, all in the South and straight into the cities we were redlined into during our own migration. For the most part, African Americans still live in those very places.
What the Democrats have often failed to see, I will point out here, that Black people in America in many ways tend more conservative than they do progressive.
Yes.
That's not unusual. But for some reason, they can't figure out how to message that in a way that makes sense because they're so entwined with the stuff from the Southern strategy and all the stuff that you and Leo talked about. They're so deeply entwined with that, they can't figure out how to message to a group of people who have some very natural conservative inclinations that should be easy to solve in terms of finding a candidate that could represent those interests, but they can't do it. This Congress is case in point. And that is kind of where the war that Dr. Maddow is really talking about. It's like we're in the fight of our lives, not because we're simply seeing the rollback of the Voting Rights Act, but because you have one party who is making it very clear based on their behavior that these groups of people, unless they hew a very specific line, are not necessarily welcome. And that line it's not about tax cuts. I wish it was. If it was just tax cuts, that'd be great. If it was about abortion, that'd be great. But it's not. There's something more nefarious going on. And that is why you don't find a plethora of candidates who are running under that platform. You'll find a few, but you will not find even a sizable minority of candidates out of the political class of people who would like to run, who say, I can get down with that platform.
Man, you're making me think, Emil. I just really grasp everything you're saying. And I just want to say this part and make sure I have this correct. I've never thought about this even since I remember being in, I love history and that kind of stuff. And my 7th grade teacher ended up being my coach in basketball or whatever. White guy was always just really helping me understand politics from the 7th grade, at least some perspective. I don't understand politics nowhere close to the way that you do. But he was the first person to point out to me in the 7th grade that, again, this white guy pointing out that African Americans, especially in the South, are very conservative. And, I was open to that at a very young age. And I think I hear you saying, yeah, it actually makes no sense that you wouldn't have Black representation, considering that many of the Blacks in the South are conservative. So you should easily be able to get more votes, if you will, and definitely find candidates that will speak to that natural Southern Belt conservative Black person. and to the effort to not do so clearly has. Hey, if it walk like a duck, talk like a duck, come on, man. That's all I'm saying out here.
Look, there are 100 HBCUs, 103 HBCUs in America.
I think it's 99 now. I think it's still,
sorry,
I think it's down to 99, but
it might be 99 now.
Yeah.
And that group of colleges produces a spectrum of thought, Black thought. They have conservatives in those institutions. They have liberals and progressives. They have radicals in those institutions. None of that is foreign to our formal education. We send people from these HBCUs to conservative and progressive / historically conservative, progressive schools. We send them to Yale, to Harvard, to Columbia. We send them to these places that produce these kinds of thinkers that are broad thinkers across the spectrum. So when you say you can't find the talent, it's not because it's not present, it's because you're not looking. And now we can go to the other stuff that Dr. Maddow was talking about, because it's a very important pivot that I wanted to make from her conversation. And that is, what does a war look like when you don't declare it? What does a war look like when you don't declare it? Because you won't hear them say, we're attacking these people, but look at the effect on the federal workforce, right? Woodrow Wilson explicitly waged war. When she was talking about that in an earlier segment, I wanted to comment on it, because in 1913, he resegregated the federal government. And I want people to hear that in 1913, a president resegregated the federal government. They were integrated. And it wasn't integrated like I want Black people and white people to work together. It was, we're going to find the best candidates for these jobs who happen to be Black people, and there was no impediment to them working. And then Woodrow Wilson's like, I don't like that. It started with the post office. And if you understand Washington, D.C. politics and economics, you know that the post office in Washington, D.C. at the turn of the last century was an amazing place for lots of Black people to get into the middle class. The post office was one of the most important employers in Washington, D.C. for Black people to get into the middle class. Then the federal government writ large was the next biggest employer of Black people. So when the resegregation happened, a lot of those jobs went away. It was not just that they were fired, they were humiliated.
Right.
That's what overt war looks like in this country.
Right. And now you're asking, what is it when it's not declared? Oh,
now you have a completely different conversation, because it's not going to be screens,
right,
but it's going to be cuts to programs. For instance, it's not legal, or it's not under policy, under executive order. You can't use the word Black to describe a program. So when it comes to maternal health, who are the most affected people? Black women. But you can't say Black women in a federal grant that would study why Black women are being so affected or improve the conditions under which Black women are having children. You can't say Black. So you don't have to declare war. You just take away something that helps that community that is struggling, that has a maternal death rate 3 times, 4 times, and in some cases 5 times as high as the national average. And you can't study that phenomenon because of the language.
And right now we have no answer, so you have to have money to figure out what
you have to figure out what's going on.
But now there's no one even allowed to figure out what the hell is going on. If that is not a clear evidence, as you said, unspoken.
It's and this is where, if you just follow the evidence, it's hard to make a case that says it's not an undeclared war against Black people in America. And when people say, oh, no, it's not this, it's not that, they keep wanting to defer to the overt imagery, the overt name calling, the overt epithets, the overt symbolism. When we're in 2026, and as blatant as it is to me, it's also subtle to people who want to be blind.
Good thought, brother. Here's an area that is highlighting racism that I think actually is class, and because it's a popular issue, it's become a political issue. And so I was like, hey, let's talk about this on the show as well. And so I'll play this cut and get your thoughts on it as well.
This bill is awful for players. I am floored. Like, I was mortified that the CBC had members that co-sponsored the SCORE Act, which was the predecessor to this one. And this bill is not terribly different from that one. This is really, really, really bad. Even if you argue that Sorsby was in the right, it could tip public and political opinion in such a way that leads to something that I believe might be worst case scenario, which is this bill.
Given the people that I've talked to about this, that won't do much to address what happens with Sorsby anyway. Like, attorneys are still going to be able to light that up. The Protect College Sports Act is really about limiting the money that they got to pay to these mostly black athletes. Bottom line, that is basically what this thing is all about.
I just want to make this point, and I think it's important because, yes, it is these mostly black athletes that we talk about right now. They was doing this when it was all white boys too.
That's true.
There are profound effects that we could argue that are skewed, and especially since the non-revenue sports are so primarily white, and so it has been an idea that these black athletes have been funding the existences of these other sports. But I think we see enough in the world to tell us they do the same thing to a bunch of white boys too. This is about class and labor as much as anything else, with some interesting, noteworthy overlaps into the race part. But back when they had all the spots, they were still keeping them boys broke.
As you see, that's right time with Bo Money Jones. I thought it was a great point because this issue is coming up, and we talked about it on the show in reference to, just to give people some context, the NAACP asking athletes to possibly not go to the ACC and SEC schools as a form of boycott based on what happened to the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. I personally have said it, I won't belabor it here. I'm absolutely not a fan of it because I felt like our ancestors were more strategic in using boycotts in the past, and there was an end game associated with it, and this felt like a just cause, and I felt like it's something that we dropped the ball on, so it's unfair to ask these kids, in a sense, to give up their money, and we still haven't given them an end game. So I just think it's sporadic and it's a just cause. Plus, I don't think boycotting is necessarily a great thing to use now that we had gotten equal protection of the law. Now that we got fair, I don't think it's a tactic that is still viable like it was when you were largely left out of whole segments of society. At that time, it was effective, and our ancestors were so effective that, as you said at the beginning of the show, Emil, all the other groups that have come thereafter, the ages, even white women, have benefited based on particularly how well our ancestors built coalitions and used this very same system to get things put in place for those that equity and equality at the time based on these acts getting passed. That's using politics how it can be used for all of those who say, oh, this system was never ours. I'm like, they use the very same system for us to enjoy. Me and you sitting on this show right now talking all the shit we want to talk, whereas they had done this years ago, in the early 1900s, we might get killed for saying some of the same shit. So I'm just saying, don't desecrate or misunderstand what our ancestors did. I did get on a soapbox, sorry. I can't help it because I'm always upset that people think, as Leo always says, if you don't get into politics, politics will get into you. And so these things that we're highlighting today will have a big effect on our collective. You individually may just be fine. I'm going to be okay. Like, that's how I live my life. I know that for a fact. However, I'm not unaware of these things that we're talking about, funding no longer going to maternal deaths, when that is a real serious issue in our community. I'm never going to have a baby, but I understand the effect of the politics on maternal death, even though it's not personal to me. So I'm just trying to walk people through how politics has an effect, even if you are okay. And now to go specifically to what Bomani's talking about, this is an issue that's going to be seen as racialized. And I think he's absolutely accurate that this College Football Act is more particularly a class and labor issue, as he pointed out. That'll be one area where I would say objectively, even though it looks, as he said, the overlap makes it looks like an exploit of trying to get money from black athletes. At the end of the day, the way that money works, they're going to come after whoever they feel like don't deserve that money. As he said, even when it was all white boys, they was keeping them broke. So I thought it was still worthy to point out, hey, there are times where we see the distinctions. I don't think the things that we've been talking about up until this point, I think they're clear and evident. It walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This is an area where I think people are going to highlight the race, where I think Monty Jones is actually right, that this is specifically a class versus labor, which is what the entire country is going through. The wealth gap has gotten so extended and the entire country's feeling it, but they're wasting time saying that what we're saying is untrue. And to Rachel Maddow's point, it's a fight for all our lives. And if you keep letting the racial divide be the thing and not see what we're saying, you're going to miss that it's a fight for all our lives. The elite are distinguishing themselves and separating themselves. And they're going to go to the moon when you let them. When things get too terrible here, they're going to go to space when you let them. They're already working on it. I'm being a little facetious here right now. I mean everything I'm saying. I mean everything I'm saying as much as I'm bringing some humor to it. Go ahead, Emil.
No, this is funny because I always say if they want to go to Mars, let them. I'm like, bye. Like, I don't know if we'd be worse off. Every time I hear a billionaire threaten to leave an area because of taxes, I'm like, bye. This is the process of creative destruction in capitalism. It's one of my favorite features of capitalism. Actually, it is from the remnants of some failed or otherwise messed up enterprise, you can build something new. I say that because the PASS Act and the SCORE Act are two birds of the same feather. These acts are trying to negotiate from a federal level how an individual athlete can use their name, image, and likeness to make money. Now, this name, image, likeness game has been going on for years, decades. But here's where I think Bomani is maybe a little bit short-sighted. This name, image, likeness game didn't take off until Black athletes started being as popular as they were. I'm not saying that there weren't any white athletes that were popular, but
let me highlight this and add this to the context. It's in existence because of Ed O'Bannon and what So this is something
you can go back to the University of Michigan, the Fab Five.
So
go back to the Fab Five. Go back to Ed O'Bannon out of UCLA. For those who don't know him, he was a basketball player at UCLA. And he was trying to maintain his ability to make money as a college athlete because he was so popular, and he would have been probably the first college millionaire had he had NIL type rights today, like we have them today. But this is the part that I think the class and labor conversation really gets skewed, right? Okay. I would love to talk about how many proportionately ugly Black billionaires and elitists there are, but we're not in that class like that. So there's this divide in that class as well as a divide down here. So there's a point at which we have to ask these questions that I think are really valuable to ask. What does a fair economy look like? And this is where we've talked about the divide between real wages and productivity since about 1981, right? With the Reagan administration and how they changed the tax code and how that really created that dichotomy. But in today's economy, we're seeing what's called the K-shaped economy. The elites, the people who are above a certain level, their economy is looking great. They're the ones whose net worth is linked to the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, right? The Russell 5000. And then there's the rest of us who are just struggling, right? That K-shaped economy, right, is people doing this and people do that is a very rare thing in America. Usually our fates are fairly well linked. Right. They're fairly well linked, not always, not perfectly aligned.
And let me throw this out too, and tell me if this is fair. And this is just my research that I've come across. And again, because you are a political historian, I want to see if I'm right. But generally speaking, that was the aim of our government to be what you're talking about, like for it to all be tied together, so for those who would be the most prosperous, the wages would be tied in a way that we basically lifted one another because things were so tied. That has been, I would say, even through our tumultuous history, that was still, in a sense, the overall government's effect, even if it was limited to quote unquote white people, that was still the goal at one point. And I think that's been lost. Is that a fair thought by me? And
it is a very fair thought.
Okay.
So you have to look back at the Gilded Age, what the industrialists, the robber barons, the people like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, Chase, all these great names in business. And you would see something that was very, very interesting. Those people in that era were producing a very tangible output. Carnegie was steel, Rockefeller was oil, Getty was oil. Like you had people who were building. Yes, you had Morgan, who was a banker, but primarily the engine of success for that kind of just obscene wealth was that there was a product or a service that was created on behalf of the American people. That's how come Ma Bell, AT&T, had a monopoly, because they were producing something. They literally wired the nation together. That's why Carnegie was given so much opportunity, because he was literally producing the steel that produced the rail and the buildings and all that sort of stuff. You just had this output of tangible products, goods, and services that changed the course of American history. But in the modern era, since about the 1980s, but definitely since the 2000s, we're making money by making money.
Okay.
Right? So the output of a great industrialist or a great banker or a great hedge fund manager is just more money. It's not a thing. It's not a steel or
so it's not tied
or roads. It's not tied. It's not tied to something that benefits the larger economy. So now what you're seeing, in my opinion, as I watch, I'm not an economist, but I do watch economies, is you see that the infrastructure is crumbling. Well, when FDR did the New Deal, there was this incredible buildup of infrastructure. We're still feeding on that infrastructure 80 years later.
Okay.
Right? That's why you're hearing about decrepitating roads and bridges, right? And all of these infrastructure issues, because we haven't refreshed what the New Deal really brought us. There was the great.
It brought us the highway system, right?
Eisenhower did the highway system. It was an amazing accomplishment. But to maintain that and to upgrade that takes billions of dollars every year. But if those billions of dollars are not linked to people who are willing to make the investments, then willing to produce the things. When I say make the investments, I'm talking, again, capital buying things that lead to jobs, outputs into the economy, infrastructure specifically. Our rail system is ancient because it's not being upgraded consistently. It's maintained, but it's not being upgraded and built out. That's why when you go to Europe and its rail system is so modern, it's because it's literally being rebuilt over and over again, because it's such an important part of the infrastructure. Our infrastructure in America is not being refreshed like that. Even the thing that is the most important, one of the most important elements of our economy is the air infrastructure, the FAA. We are just now getting to the point where we have to redo all of that because it's based on 70s technology, right? So we're just not putting those investments in, and we don't have that class of industrialists like we did at the turn of the 20th century to produce the outputs that, yes, they're getting rich, they're getting incredibly wealthy, stratospheric amounts of money, but they're also making something that the American people can rely on for the next several decades as part of their rise, as an overall rise for all of the people in the economy.
All right, so that difference actually has happened. Okay, thank you for explaining that to me. I'm actually pulling up a cut that really hits on something you talked about last week. We had this special edition show with Dr. Boyce Watkins last week, where he and I went back and forth on the importance of voting, if you will. He says, hey, he doesn't put a lot of worth in it. And I'm just, highlighting, as we've consistently talked about on Politically Conscious, understanding the power of your vote will tie you to it, and not join the 89 million who, for example, didn't show up at the last general election. But what you highlighted specifically when we were talking about Dr. Boyce Watkins was the need to show up from primaries and midterms. Like, that's where there's a miss, where Dr. Boyce was kind of highlighting, hey, I think black people got voting down pat. We show up, I'm like, no, we don't show up at the primaries. We don't show up at the midterms. And here's a cut from a brother by the name of Shane McCray. I just came across this morning, and I was like, oh, this is exactly what Emil was talking about. So let me play this cut. We're in our extra innings right now, so I'm not going to hold you too much longer, but I definitely want to hear your response. And this is talking about data centers, which is a big item issue now politically that people kind of on both sides or against on some parts. I'll throw this out as an opinion. I understand the need to provide jobs with the risk. That is always going to be a reality in America. I was on another show, Ask About Data Centers, and I was like, at the end of the day, people who don't need them and have the money to make sure it doesn't come to their place, that's what's going to happen. That's going to be the reality, whether we like it or not. But this brother Sean McCray points out a lot of what you point out in reference to data centers. So I thought you would like this cut, Emil.
Trump's DOJ is now arguing in court that Elon Musk's AI company should be allowed to pollute majority black neighborhoods without having the required permits. The DOJ filed a motion in a Mississippi federal court asking a judge to dismiss a Clean Air Act lawsuit against Elon Musk's company xAI.
Bruh, I don't know what else to fucking tell y'all. Y'all would rather put your fucking energy into voting for Love Island, going to destroy communities over an NBA team winning the championship, but yet you won't pay attention to the fact that you live in this part of your district that has railroads, power plants, factories, blue-collar jobs, and everything being outsourced. And the area of your district that have general infrastructure, airports, sanitation, metropolitan areas, and major businesses, they would not put data centers over there. Why wouldn't they just put it where they already have the support structures where you live? But yet, you don't want to participate in the primary elections nor the midterm elections because you said politics don't affect you, but politics is currently being used to affect you. The person that's going to be in charge of your district and determine where these things are placed is dependent on who votes during primary and midterm elections based on that person's ideologies, their policies, and their direction and who they are aligned with. And you can't tell me, well, I don't know who to vote for. You know who to vote for in Love Island. You know what NBA team to root for. You can tell me all about this NBA player's career or this contestant on Love Island, but you can't tell me who's running for primary or midterm elections that's going to be in charge of your daily life. What are we talking about? Man, y'all not hearing me. Y'all just want to dance. As long as we tracking.
That is a powerful statement. And here's why I'm so adamant about voting in the primary. The mayor election of Cincinnati, which definitely affects your daily life, was decided by 43,000 people in the city of Cincinnati. 32,000 people voted for the incumbent Mayor Bibb. 10,000 voted for his opponent. That is how many people in the city of Cincinnati, which is about 1 million people strong, a little bit more.
Wow.
Voted for mayor, which affects your daily life. So if you have a concerted block of 5,000 voters in a city like Cincinnati or Seattle or Denver, and you vote in the primary as a block, you go from, you flex. People don't understand the power of the midterm. Across America, the primaries, I don't care if they're closed or open, Democrat, Republican, jungle, those typically garner around 15% total of the voting populace. Just as an average across the nation, about 15%. You don't think that you can affect change? You say, none of the candidates are worth anything because you don't know how to use the primary. You don't understand the power of the primary. Go back 15 years. Barack Obama was elected in 2008. In 2010, we had a midterm election and the Tea Party shows up in force. The Tea Party scares the living daylights out of the Republican Party. There is now a Tea Party caucus. It's been reframed. I think it's the Freedom Caucus or something like that. But there was a Tea Party caucus after 2010. In one cycle, they primaried everybody that didn't hew to the line that they said they wanted to follow. It is very possible for people. Thanks, Kenny, for the numbers. I'm sorry about getting it right. It's very possible for you to have an overnight change in how your city is run based on just a primary. That's how powerful it is. And this is something that I think other people miss. Well, you know, the big show, the Oscars, if you will, of politics is the presidential election, right? This is the big show. Everybody, oh, you know, rah, 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 rah. But the grits and cornbread, the fat back and the hog maws, the collard greens and the green beans.
Absolutely.
That's the primaries. That's
why I vehemently disagree with Dr. Boyce last week. And my point to him was just even insinuating that that voting is not important. Like, as I kept saying to him on the show last week, I never said he said don't vote. I never said that he said that.
No, you did not.
But I was actually attacking the fact that he would often insinuate or apply or make a comparison in which, when he the comparison he makes with the Asians, how well they're doing wealth-wise or whatever, and how little they participate. And I, offer as a contrast to him, I say, well, when they're aggregated, when they live close together, they actually line up and actually lobby. I don't know a lot of African Americans lining up and lobbying and whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying, pointing out. So yeah, they will do it where they're aggregated. And as he already pointed out, they have the money.
Right.
Whatever. And so what you're pointing out with the numbers you just pointed out with Cincinnati, that's, like you said, a voting block of 5,000 out of a thing where only 40,000 people voted anyway. That 5,000 makes a difference whether you put money in politics or not, which is your point. And so that's where people learn to devalue their one vote and think it doesn't matter.
Think about the down ballot votes. You have said in your show, on this show, many times how you were able to affect change in a neighborhood based on a vote. So think about all the stuff. So yeah, you're voting for mayor, but there are referendums that are happening. Public utility commissions are happening. You're mad at these big corporations because they literally petition the Public Utility Commission and they say, we're going to raise rates. That Public Utility Commission has to approve that rate raise. Exactly. If you vote those people in that you want in, they don't have to approve that raise. Exactly. They have to eat that cost if they have to eat that cost.
We've been able to do that in my district before.
There's mechanisms in place. You don't like your water coming from your tap, there's a water commission in your neighborhood. Have you been voting for that? Because the people who are voting for that water quality, those are people who actually can affect what comes out of your tap. You can buy bottled water, or you could have clean water from your tap. These are not impossibilities. These are direct inputs to the quality of life. And we're not using the power we have available to us. I will never tell. Black people's argument has often been, Montoya, what have I ever gotten from voting? Nothing. Voting alone doesn't do anything, but voting with intent, voting with using your other powers that are available to you, the power of your purse, recognizing which businesses are supporting your agenda and which are not. You have to understand, voting is like the foundation of activism. It is not the end of it. You have to vote and. So whatever your and is, whether it's through your church or through your business or through your community organization, it's voting and. But without voting, all of that stuff is harder to do. But with voting, you can start with that, and then you say, I can galvanize hundreds of votes, thousands of votes. I can galvanize, and then if you put economics on top of that, this is what, don't look at me and say, well, what's Emil doing? No, look at the playbook that has successfully been run by many different groups for the last 40 years. Voting is just one element of their game, but the game is not just voting. And if they see that, they're going to do those things. When they need people say, oh, Asians don't vote. Asian of us, what Dr. Boyce was talking about, Asians don't vote like we do. But Asians also have other game they're running. And the Asian community has some mechanisms within the community that are incredibly powerful because they have a common language. When you look at Chinese or Korean, specifically when you break out Asians by ethnicity or country of origin, the Koreans have some very specific things they do as Koreans because they bring that from their Korean culture. Chinese have some very specific things they do because they bring it from their Chinese culture. There's ways that they get around just voting, but African Americans, we have the vote, and that is our primary tool. It's just not our exclusive tool. So I never will acknowledge that voting alone does anything. But voting, not voting, what has that gotten you? Because I don't know what it has gotten you, if anything. Not voting hasn't been a strategy for anyone since the time we got the vote in mass.
Yeah, what happens is the assumption is the things that you don't like. Let's say you're in Memphis and the data center, is pretty much it's there, it's coming, it's there if it's not already there. I'm just saying you just assume, well, they would have got that anyway. Like the things that you don't like that happen, you just assume that, it would have been that way whether I voted or not. And what's happening is like Latrice was on the show at one point. I saw her in the comments talking about how well some of the typically black cities, the Baltimores and the Montgomerys of the world, like most people don't even know because there's no media propaganda behind it, how well those cities are doing. And those cities are doing well largely because of the American Save Act and what they were able to put money specifically into, instead of over policing, to put money into mental health programs, to put money into preventative programs at the youth level. And they've seen significant changes and actually, quote unquote, murder rates the lowest they've seen since the 60s. This has all been in a year as a part of an aggregation of the American Save Act. But again, I'm not saying that you have, as the young brother was pointing out, hey, what a great player is, what this is. I don't knock people for being able to keep up with stuff that's promoted to you every day. Like, I don't knock you for that. I still need to get my game up on how much politics I understand. I try to get better every time I go in the voting booth of understanding who I'm voting for before I go. But I would not say I am like Emil, who understands exactly who I'm voting for every time. I'm not even trying to pretend or be something that I'm not. But to continue to say what did you get and did not get ends up being relatively ridiculous. I don't want to take too much of your time, but go ahead.
I appreciate it. The last thought I have to this, because you brought up something that's really important. I don't need people to study every candidate down to the nub. I need them to recognize that there are some key issues affecting their quality of life right outside their door, and know who's helping solve those problems. I don't care if they have an R or a D by their name. I care that they care about those problems that are right outside your door. Is your neighborhood school good? Are the potholes filled? Is your air, soil, and water quality okay? We're talking about some basic stuff here. You can cipher that out fairly quickly. You don't need to have a PhD in political science to answer those questions. But when you ask those questions, and you understand how to get the answers to those questions, you are an informed voter, and that's just enough. Again, we don't need you to have deep knowledge about every candidate. We just need you to be able to say, which one of these two people affects the quality of my life? And the moment you understand that, you start voting differently, because you understand that there are things they can do and will do in response to your vote if you understand what your vote really represents.
Nah, real enough, true enough. I'm going to close out with this clip from Obama. You can stay on and watch if you like. And this is back when Obama was on the Breakfast Club, because there's this, what did Obama do for black people? And I thought it was just a cool way to end today's show, as we talked about the Trump administration and whether there was a real or fabricated war on black people. I think we're missing our right side of the viewpoint today. But from our perspective, I think that war, quote unquote, that assault is more real than fabricated from our perspective. Yeah, well, we miss our brother Shelly's perspective on that, but I just thought this was a good way to end the show. So you can choose to listen or not. If you got to go, I respect it, brother. But I just thought it was a cool way to end out today's show.
With reading this book and all that you did for every community, including our own community, how do you take it when you hear, especially African Americans and minorities, say that they feel that President Barack didn't do enough for minorities, didn't do enough for black people? What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? I understand it, because when I got elected, there was so much excitement and hope. And I also think that we generally view the presidency as almost like a monarchy, in the sense of well, once the president's there, he can just do whatever needs to get done. And if he's not doing it, then it must be because he didn't want to do it.
Well, we see it with Trump, so he does what he wants to do, so people assume.
Well, right, because he breaks laws.
Right.
And or disregards the Constitution. But look, I think that anybody who goes into public life, they need to understand that, yeah, you're going to get criticized because that's just the nature of it. If you don't want that, then you shouldn't be in that business. The good news for me was that I was very confident in what I had done for black folks because I had the statistics to prove it, right? So by the time I left office, you had seen 3 million African Americans have health care that didn't have it before. You had seen the incarceration rate, the number of black folks in prison, drop for the first time in years. You had seen the juvenile correction system, 30% fewer people in there. You had seen black poverty drop to its lowest level since 1968. You had seen black businesses rise. You had seen black income go up. So I could just look at the data and I could say millions of black folks were better off at the time I left office than when I came in. And you know, what I have to accept, and I think what any president has to accept, is the fact that, okay, so I got 20 million people health care, but there's still 10 million out there who don't have health care because Republicans blocked me from doing everything I wanted to do with Obamacare. I can understand why they would be upset. How come things didn't change?
I think people want to know, like, what did you do specifically for black people? Not the rising tide lifts all boats types of rhetoric, because we all know black people's boat got a hole in it. So the systemic things that were done to black people to put us in these positions, we need specific systemic things to get us out. So what did you do in that regard?
What I'm saying, Charlamagne, is black poverty dropped faster than everybody else. Black incomes went up more than a lot of other folks. So, you know, the issue is sometimes we just didn't go around advertising that because, once again, the goal here is to build coalitions where everybody is getting something so that they all feel like they've got a stake in it. But a lot of my policies were targeted towards people most in need. Those folks are disproportionately African American. Now, the truth of the matter is, Charlamagne, at the end of the day, there is no way in 8 years to make up for 200 years.
Absolutely.
I think it's a great way to end the show, Emil, just to kind of, again, we keep talking about political strategy and how it actually works versus I would offer some of the common things we say about politics that are not true about, again, politics. And so at the end of the day, you know, I even talked about, I think I might have said it on this last week's show with Dr. Boyce. I even highlight like the silliness of when the Asians actually put their money in politics to get added to the hate crime bill, right? I pointed out to Dr. Boyce, yeah, it was last week. I pointed out to him, I was like, I remember on social media, there were black people saying, look at what they got, not realizing the hate crime bill has been in place for us for a whole bunch of years, and it got re-enhanced in 2008 during Obama's time. Like people were literally looking at them get added to the hate crime bill, and there were people on social media, the black people, saying, we don't have nothing like that. Like, we've been had it. But if you don't know that, you can see the Asians finally get highly involved in politics because, again, across the country, they're not widely involved. They don't widely vote. That is true. I'm not trying to say that they're widely involved in politics. But when an issue affects them, they put their money together and got added to the hate crime bill real quick, fast, in a hurry, as they needed to, based on things that were happening around the country pandemic-wise to them specifically. But those enhancements that they got by getting added on to already apply to someone outside of our race harming us, particularly because of our race. Those enhancements meaning, for those to be clear that are watching, meaning you will get added time to your sentence if it is proven that, you know, your harm or, you know, God forbid, you're murdered due to your race. Then the consequences to that person they'll get added time in the enhancements. And those enhancements, they work very well in cities that have gang enhancement, bad gang problems. And so, yeah, we, you know, as a matter of fact, I see black people now brag about, yeah, like even Dr. Wilson saying, hey, you ain't worried about no white person killing you. Like, yeah, this stuff works. Politics works. When we were getting them put in place, we were having episodes of people getting killed still just because of their race. Like the consequence actually works. We will actually just get it, think nothing of it, and say, "Oh yeah, we never got nothing from politics." Go ahead, Emil.
As we finish this episode, man, and I appreciate this conversation because I think it's very, very important. We have to ask these questions about what does freedom look like, and where I think we have missed the mark a lot of times. In to your point, is that what is revolutionary for us is common for our children. Right? Because we changed the baseline of what's normal. But the problem is there's always this force, I call it a gravity, that wants to suck us down, suck us back into a past that we don't necessarily want. Because the culture hasn't evolved as fast as the laws have. So we just need to remember that although what happened to me in my, you know, I was born in 1970, my life looks nothing like my parents' life. My mother integrated her school in Portland, Oregon. I didn't integrate my school in Portland, Oregon. I was just one of few. But the baseline has shifted. The problem is we have to defend that baseline. We're not going to just say, "Oh, it's all good now."
And that's where we've dropped the ball.
That's where I'm going.
I know where you're going. That's why, yes, I know.
Right, like we can't stop being vigilant, right? And we say this as Americans. We learned this in the Air Force. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. You can't get complacent. You can't get lazy. You can't think, oh, now that I've got this game, because the moment you do, there's a force in this nation that will say, no, I'll take you back. Well, as long as you stay vigilant, you'll stay free.
And I want to highlight the force that we just pointed out specifically on this show. They went through the political system and used it to effectively get what they wanted. Here it is. We will just say, oh, that's just what they do. No, they had to go through the political system, meaning, to your point, we can be vigilant to make sure that shit don't happen. But if you sit back and become apathetic to the point where you allow those who are literally saying, if we get less people to vote, we can actually have more of an effect. That's literally what's happening. So to your point, Emil, is if you understand how this game works, you will stay involved. You will become more informed so that you can actually use the same system that you quote unquote say is against you, instead of realizing the game is just the game. That's what we're trying to teach more than anything. The game is the game.
If you understand how to play, you'll never not play. But if you think you cannot or don't know how to play, you'll think the game is rigged. It's not rigged. It's simply a game that you can learn the rules to and play. And the better you learn the rules, the more savvy you are at playing it. I watch lots of people play lots of games that I can't play. And it looks like wizardry to me. But I know if I were to put 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 hours into that same game, I would be a master of it too.
Exactly. All right, man. Great show, man. Appreciate the time. We'll see y'all next week. Hopefully we'll have the left and right, which is how we typically try to do the show. We try to get both perspectives. And so, hey, you got it from, I guess, one side today per se, because at the end of the day, I keep saying this, if it walk like a quack like a duck, it's a duck. And so that's how I see today's show. All right, brother. Thank you for your time. See y'all next week. I'm gonna end with
propaganda.
Hey, listen to us. I'm gonna end with a promo for Sunday night for anybody that may be interested in. At the end of the day, Black love is necessary, especially now. And so we have a community surrounding marriage, surrounding those who want to be married, those who are married, and those long-time pair bonded. We have a community where we talk once a month. And so I want to highlight the Black Love Dialogue and Wine podcast. So we'll end with that promotion and ask y'all to subscribe to the page and tell people about us. What if the biggest threats to marriages today isn't cheating, but emotional immaturity? This Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, join Black Love Dialogue and Wine and psychotherapist Makaya Dominguez and relationship coach Derek Cecile Clark tackle the hard truth. The skills that made men successful in marriages of the past may not be enough for the marriages of today. If you're serious about love, marriage, and legacy, this conversation is for you. So join us for a private podcast experience and get your tickets at mentaldialogue.com.